Welcome to the 9th muscle lecture. This is a new record here. Hopefully we can keep this going. Another type of muscle contraction is this variety called the isometric contraction. Iso means same, metric means length. So in this case, the muscle does not change in length. So in concentric muscle contraction, the muscle got shorter. In eccentric, the muscle got longer. In isometric, it doesn't change in length. So basically, all the muscle is doing in this case is pulling on the connective tissue, the elastic connective tissue, and stretching that because the weight is just too heavy. If we look at a graph, the length graph never changes. That's why it's isometric, same length. The tension looks kind of like a normal isotonic tension graph, but here's the thing. The amount of tension developed by the muscle is less than the load. So the load never moves, and that's why the muscle never changes its resting length. All right, yay. Now we can do some energy supply. There are three basic systems we're going to discuss. There's the phosphagen system, glycogen, and an aerobic respiration. All right. Obviously, you need ATP for muscles to contract. ATP, when our myosin breaks it down, it puts the myosin in the high energy position that it can then use to pull an actin. You store a little bit of ATP in your muscle cells. And you use it up pretty darn quickly. We're talking in a matter of seconds you use it up. But you have some other stored phosphates that let you regenerate ATP. Remember, when you break down adenosine triphosphate, ATP, you get adenosine diphosphate, ADP. And there is an enzyme in your muscle cells that is called myokinase. Myokinase is going to catalyze a reaction where you take a single molecule of ADP and you rip a phosphate off of it and you add that phosphate to another ADP, which then makes you a molecule of ATP. And then you also end up with a molecule of AMP, which is adenosine monophosphate. So this is a quick way to generate new molecules of ATP. Another thing you do is your muscles are going to store something, this guy right here called CP. That guy right there is known as creatine phosphate. And there is an enzyme called creatine kinase in your muscle cells. And what creatine kinase will do, it'll rip a phosphate off the creatine phosphate and then add that phosphate to an ADP, and that makes you a brand new ATP, as well as just a creatine by itself. Okay, so this is one of the ways we generate energy for our muscles, but we're talking seconds here. We are talking seconds. And sometimes we need muscles to contract for more than seconds, 8 to 10 seconds. Now we got to get into the minutes, a little more than a minute or so. And to do that, we need to break down glucose. Breaking down glucose is known as glycolysis. And when we break down glucose, we are going to end up with two molecules of this chemical called pyruvate. Two molecules of pyruvate. It actually takes two molecules of ATP and two molecules of another component called NAD+, in order to do glycolysis. And by the time we're done glycolysis, we get that 2-pyruvate, and we get 4 ATP and 2 molecules of something called NADH. Notice that the net ATP here is 2 ATPs per glucose. And this is okay, but it's not a lot. This is going to last us not much more than a minute doing this glucose breakdown, this glycolysis. So we got to have another way. And we're going to get to that other way. All right, if we look at this picture here, it's another example of glycolysis. Glucose plus 2 NAD plus and 2 is going to end up making 2 pyruvates and then also a net production of 2 ATPs. Now, what we need to do sometimes is regenerate this NAD plus in order for glycolysis to continue. So what we're going to do is turn the pyruvate into something called lactate or lactic acid, which you may have heard of. And what that does is it converts the NADH back into NAD plus, which allows us to continue to do more glycolysis. All right. Wonderful. Let's talk about what happens when we add oxygen to the mix. Another thing that we can do, and this is the best thing ever, what we can also do is instead of turning that pyruvate, which is pyruvic acid right here, instead of turning that pyruvate into lactic acid, we can take that pyruvate and we can put it into the mitochondria. While in the mitochondria, the pyruvate goes through something called the Krebs cycle. We make more NADHs and this other thing called FADH2, and they go through something called the electron transport chain. And the net result of all of this is we make a whole heck of a lot more ATP. While we made 2 ATP for glycolysis, we're going to make another 32-ish for what's going on aerobically in the mitochondria. And this is aerobic because it requires oxygen. And we actually make CO2 as a byproduct of this. This is how we make CO2 in our body. It is this is how we use oxygen. This is how we make CO2. All right. Awesome. Oh, yeah, we're done with that. Yay! Muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue, and then we all gotta do is like 7 more slides. Okay. Muscle fatigue can happen for lots of reasons. There's lots of things you can run out of, including acetylcholine. You can run out of glucose, storage of glucose, glycogen. Your calcium levels can go down too low. Your muscle cell can have too much hydrogen. In other words, it's too acidic, too much ammonia. You can have too much of that phosphate, that naked phosphate. These are all things that can lead to muscle fatigue. But there's more to it though. All of these things are examples of peripheral fatigue. These are all peripheral fatigue. These are things going on inside the muscle cell and at that neuromuscular junction. But there's also something called central fatigue, where your brain is actually making a decision. Your brain, your spinal cord are making a decision. Sometimes your brain, spinal cord are going to intervene and make you feel more fatigued in order to prevent an injury. So fatigue is not always in your muscle cells. Your muscles actually, most of the time, can keep on contracting and keep on going, but it's your spinal cord and your brain that are what's causing you to stop. So that's central fatigue versus peripheral fatigue. All right, let's clear that. Let's keep going. There's also something called oxygen debt. What we need to do after exercise, if you go find a nice hill like this and sprint up it, you're going to keep breathing deeply afterwards because you got to fix all the things that were broken down. You got to move ions back to where they were. You got to replenish myoglobin. Put glucoses back together as glycogen. Doing all of that, replenishing your energy stores, is known as oxygen debt. All right, one more lecture after this. See ya.